The Sherpa's Podcast Picks is presented in cooperation with Thresher PR, which is headed by Stephen Joyner. We now take you to the Sherpa Chalet, where Jim, the podcast Sherpa, will be interviewing podcasters near and far. Personally, if you've ever stood next to the Sherpa, you'd hope it will be far. That new yak-scented shampoo isn't getting him any new friends.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host, who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpalution, and welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Pick. It is me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios, here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where we overlook thousands and thousands and thousands upon all the podcasts that are out there in this land of podcasts. The lovely Sherpa Bride is looking at me and laughing. I don't know why. She's just laughing.
I'm so proud of you.
She's mocking me. So anyway, you may have noticed that the last few episodes have not been about podcasts. And we can't have that happen because, after all, this is primarily a podcast about podcasts. And I am a huge podcast fan. And how can I prove that to you? This is going to be an episode full of Sherpa Samples. In the time that we have not had episodes interviewing podcasters, I've still been checking out podcasts that I would like you to hear about. And maybe there'll be other ones that you want to add to your podcast playlist, hopefully, in addition to this one, of course. So that's what we're going to do. I've got 30 of them. 30! I'm calling it the 30 podcasts in under 30 minutes. Kind of like a pizza delivery, but it's a podcast delivery. You don't even have to leave me a tip. Actually, the biggest tip you can do is subscribe and share this episode with your friends on social media. How's that for a tip? Ooh, might have to pay tax on that. I don't know. I guess that we will find out. So before we get into that, though, I do have a little tale to tell you. You remember a while back, I was doing ads for a company called Magic Mind. I found out January is called Mental Wealth Month. They've reached out to me to say, hey, you want to let your listeners know about Mental Wealth Month? I said, sure, because I've used their product before. So if you haven't tried Magic Mind, it's a shot that is made with mushrooms along with a lot of herbs that will help you seek mental clarity and relax you and give you a lot of focus. And now they've even got a new product out called Sleep Elixir, which will help you sleep better. So what happens in Mental Wealth Month? It's their investment in mental resilience across the 5 key pillars: sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and exogenous compounds. Ooh, I like that. You know how I feel about big words. Exogenous. I like that. That's really cool. This is long term. This isn't just some drink that you're going to drink filled with caffeine that's going to make you all jittery. No. I've been taking this for a while since they got back in touch with me. I took it the last time they sent it to me and had some really interesting results. And it does definitely make you see clearly and not jittery at all. There is caffeine in it, but not the kind of caffeine that's going to make your heart race or anything like that. No. Perfectly safe. It is not a coffee replacement. You can have it with your coffee or your morning tea if you like, because it's daily essential vitamins for your mind. And it's also got L-theanine in it, which also makes your coffee last all day. As we said, that it's 100% safe. All ingredients are third-party tested, and they are sourced from the best suppliers. And you know what the company also does? They donate 5 cents for every bottle that they sell to mental health charities that benefit U.S. homeless communities. How many companies do that? Not many, I might add. Not many. Magic Mind is doctor-validated. It's created with a scientific advisory board of doctors and medical researchers in development for over 10 years and over 100 iterations just for them to make just the right formula. And those mushrooms that are in there, they're organically grown in California, and they use the fruiting body, which is where you find the highest density of beneficial bioactive compounds as opposed to the mycelia. A lot of big words here. I like that. And they also use nano-encapsulation technology that makes their ingredients more bioabsorbable, meaning that your body soaks it up quicker as opposed to pills and powder. And for Mental Wealth Month, Magic Mind is offering you this special deal. It's the January Mental Wealth Challenge. And for the first time, you're going to get focus and sleep shots bundled up for the first time at a 45% discount included with the little link that I'm going to tell you right now. Listen, pay attention, write this down. It's www.magicmind.com/ in capitals, Sherpa, Sherpa, Jan, Jan for January. And if you go to that link, which will be in the show notes, you'll get that great discount and you'll get a great product that will help you think clearly and also sleep clearly at night and feel more rested. Who doesn't need that? Everybody needs that, right? I'm going to take a nap after this podcast as we're speaking. I think I can use some of that right now. But I think before I take a nap, I'm going to tell you about some Sherpa samples. I've got 30 of them. 30! We better move into it right about now. Okay, Rebels, I am ready for this. 30 podcasts in under 30 minutes. Here we go. Sherpa samples time. Let's talk about the first 10 first. And within that first 10, there were a lot of podcasts that had to do with politics and conspiracy theories and corruption. So we'll talk about those first. The Coming Storm has to do with conspiracies about the January 6th Capitol riots in Washington, D.C., and the belief that a deep state was involved with overturning democracy. Master Plan also had to do with corruption in government. That has to do, interestingly enough, with a story from 1971 with the price of milk. I am not kidding. And it's definitely not what you would expect. Autocracy in America discusses creating corruption in democracy by creating conspiracy theories. And while we're talking about conspiracy theories, there is Marianna in Conspiracy Land, which I think is also called Why Do You Hate Me? And that also has to do with conspiracies on the assassination of now President Trump when he was campaigning for office. And also in a political vein, there was also a podcast called the Bulwark Podcast, which was a discussion of Donald Trump's trials. It is hosted by a gentleman named Tim Miller. And BFFs is a pop culture gossip show, and it is hosted by 3 BFFs, Dave Portnoy, Josh Richards, and Brianna Chicken Fry. And they talk a lot about their celebrity encounters in this podcast. Chicken Fry, I like that. That's a cool last name. In the true crime genre, in that first 10, we had Missing Niamh, which has to do with a woman who was in Australia who vanished when she was, I believe, working on a farm as a young person. And the case went cold, and the family's hopes were by reopening this case in a podcast that hopefully they could find out what happened to Niamh. And also the Binge cases. Denise didn't come home. It's a story about a woman named Denise Velasca who disappeared in the 1960s, and her sister also had this case reopened as a cold case, and it talks about the investigation into her disappearance. Storytime with Kay is a podcast that has stories for kids. It's that easy. They're very short, so we don't really talk too much about podcasts for younger kids, and I checked it out. It was a nice, simple story, nothing adult or spooky about it, and very well done. So if you've got a youngster and you want them to hear some stories, check out this podcast. And lastly, Hildy, the Barback, and the Lake of Fire. Now, I am not a fan of fantasy podcasts, but I got such a kick out of this one. There are a lot of great actors and actresses lending their voices to this podcast. Hildy is actually portrayed by actress Melissa McCarthy, and it's very funny. It's very offbeat as far as a fantasy podcast is concerned. If you like that kind of goofy stuff, definitely check that one out. Okay, 10 down. We got 20 more to go. Okay, serial killers. Well, that's a little bit obvious. It is a baking podcast. Of course, it's about serial killers, different ones. The episode that I checked out had to do with the dating game killer. I didn't really know too much about this guy, but he was actually a contestant on the dating game. I don't think he killed the person that was on the show that he won the date with, but this person had a real seedy background and a very dangerous person, and it goes into the story about him. Deadly Mirage, another true crime, had to do with a family living in California where the husband was found murdered, and the podcast takes a look at his family life and his close-knit group of friends. World of Secrets, Finding Mr. Fox. This has to do with 2 gentlemen who were hired to pilot a yacht for this mysterious Mr. Fox without realizing that this person was a drug smuggler. And another true crime was called Bromwyn, and it is the story of a woman living in Australia. Her name was Bromwyn Winfield. She was married and lived in this custom-built house with her husband, and supposedly she had this very unhappy marriage. And one day she disappeared. So the podcast goes into her disappearance, or if her husband was actually a suspect in her murder. Very well done by the Australian media if you want to check out an Australian true crime podcast. What did you do yesterday? No, that's really the name of the podcast. What did you do yesterday? It's hosted by Max Rushton and David O'Doherty. That's basically what the premise of the show is. They have guests on and they discuss their day in detail. And they're very funny. I believe one is Irish and one is Australian, if I'm not mistaken. But there definitely is a strong injection of humor in this. It's very entertaining and very unique. I like that. Well done, gentlemen. Hyperfixed is a podcast by Alex Goldman, and I believe he's a writer, a tech writer, and he looks into things where people are posting, the burning questions, and he tries to find out the answers. And the issue that I was listening to was about the refrigeration of milk in supermarkets. I'm not kidding. Not Gonna Lie is hosted by Kylie Kelsey. And if that name sounds familiar, Kylie Kelsey is married to Jason Kelsey, who is one half of the Kelsey brothers who host the Flying Higher football podcast. And her podcast, I don't believe, is about sports. The episode that I caught had to do with parenting, and she was interviewing actress Caitlin Olsen, who's on one of my favorite TV shows right now, High Potential, and she talks about all different stuff on there too. I think she was actually an athlete at some point as well. It's a matter of time. If you guys are fans of the podcast called Knowledge Fight, which is a spoof on InfoWars. It's hosted by Dan and Jordan. They're very funny. I guess they're doing something different since InfoWars isn't on anymore, I'm presuming. And they're just watching TV shows. And I think they were watching La Femme Nikita and they really weren't liking it. So they decided to watch an old 1960s TV program called It's About Time. And I remember that show. It had to do with two astronauts who landed in the Stone Age. And it actually featured Imogene, Coco, and Joe E. Ross. Ooh, that guy, ooh. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? Empire City, the untold origin story of the NYPD, is a story of the formation of the NYPD. And the first episode goes into why there was a need for a police force in New York City way back when. I believe it was in the 1800s when it first came about. Not Loveline is hosted by two podcasters who've done other shows, and their names are Tana Mongeau, which I think we talked about one of her podcasts before, and Trish Patras, who also had a podcast. I don't remember what the name of her podcast was, but it's a sex and dating podcast. They don't claim to be dating experts. They're just giving their unfiltered opinions of a lot of dating stories. And also, we left out Redacted, Declassified Mysteries. And the episode that I listened to had to do with creating an uprising in Iran, and it was run by the CIA. And at that time, the person behind the operation was Kermit Roosevelt, who was the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, and how it ultimately led to the American hostage crisis in Iran later on down the line. We're 2/3 down. Okay, these I've actually listened to pretty recently, and definitely another interesting collection. All year I dream about gaming conventions. That is the name of the podcast, and it is hosted by two, I guess, gaming geeks. And the episode that I caught, that's what they're talking about. They're listing all of the gaming conventions that were in the United States and what to expect when you attend them. The rest is classified, more highly classified stories that come to light. This episode did with the creation of MI6, which is the British version of the CIA, I believe. I did not know this, but the first head of the MI6 was actually called C for Commander, not, I think it was M on the James Bond movies, but I've never seen a Bond movie, but shh, don't tell my buddy Steve Rubin. Okay, Parenting Hell. That is hosted by two British gentlemen, Rob Beckett and Josh Whitcomb, and they talk about parenting, and they offer advice, and they present advice from their listeners as well. Obviously, a comical podcast, and Very British, as we like to say, very British. Extra Dirty is hosted by Hallie Batchader, and I believe that she was a YouTube influencer. And this is another dating and sex talk podcast. So judging by the title, you can imagine where the language goes with this one. So I'll just kind of let you draw your own conclusions with that. The Telepathy Tapes. This one was really an unusual podcast. It had to do with, I guess, conversations with autistic people who could not speak. And they found out that these people were actually telepathic. It's a 13-part podcast if you want to check it out. But it was definitely something that was a little unusual. The Good Whale. This is another story that I really didn't know too much about. The whale that was featured in Free Willy was actually kept in a small body of water in Mexico. Not like a bathtub or anything like that, but just a small body of water. And it had to do with actually freeing the whale who was freed as Willy. And the background story behind freeing this whale that was playing a freed whale. There were also a couple of religious podcasts in the mix. The Rosary in a Year and the Bible Recap. And they contain readings from the Bible and a discussion of those readings as well. So if you are a religious person and you like your share of Bible stories, there's 2 podcasts for you right then and there. Fall of Civilizations is a historical podcast, obviously. These are kind of long. They can be anywhere between 2 and 5 hours long. You may want to take it in small doses, but it's very interesting. It uses narration and also voiceover actors. The episode that I checked out was the end of the Mongol civilization. And this discusses the ending of the Genghis Khan era when he was followed by the Kublai Khan era. And how these civilizations fall apart. And each week they discuss a different civilization. And this last one I really got a kick out of. It's called Crimes, Conspiracies, Cults, and Murder. It is hosted by a lady named Kalmekris. That's her Spotify name, I guess. And she's very entertaining when she discusses all of these crazy stories. And she doesn't hold back her opinions, obviously. I should probably try and get her on the show. That would be a lot of fun to get to talk to her. Maybe if she's listening, she might want to swing by and pay me a visit. And they talked about the Children of God cult. I never really heard about this. The story is a little bit disturbing. There's a lot of incest involved, so not one for the kids. But if you like hearing about crazy stories, this is a podcast that you might want to listen to. And you might want to listen to any of these podcasts as well, depending on what your tastes are. I hope you can check some of them out, as long as continuing to check out this podcast as well. Whew. Okay. That's 30. We can head into the outro.
Listen and subscribe on podcast apps everywhere. And we're on YouTube at Sherpalution. Sorry, no video. You're welcome.
Thanks so much for swinging by the Sherpa Chalet and catching some Sherpa Samples with me. And we do that when we do these podcast shows. So I really just wanted to let you guys know what I've been listening to and maybe hope that you might be checking out some of these podcasts as well. They were some I really enjoyed, too. I got to say that. So you know that, or maybe you don't know, that I am no longer on Twitter at Sherpalution. Nope, gone. History. I'm now on an app called Blue Sky, which is actually very similar to Twitter, but it's without the Nazis, so it's a lot of fun there. So if you are on Blue Sky, make sure you subscribe and follow me and just say hello if you want to say hello. I will gladly say hello to you right back. A few other changes going on. You will notice that I really don't mention Sherpalution.com. Right now, the webpage is on hold. I'm going to be making some changes this year. So the website, not there. The Ko-fi page, not there. And also the T-Sherpa shop. That's going to be closing down as well, just in case you were thinking about buying some podcast merchandise. All gone. But it's 2025. We got to make a change. We want to make some things a little bit nicer for you, the listener. And you know that every Wednesday we have new episodes here, usually. And on Saturdays, we do Sherpa Selects, where you get to hear the classic episodes. That's right, the classics. We have classics. Stuff from season 1 through 6. I think that I'm up to season 3, season 4, somewhere around there. We're like halfway through and been replaying a lot of the favorite ones from the early seasons. Remastered, got it sounding a little bit nicer too, as a matter of fact. So I hope you do check those out. And of course, you can hear these on any podcast apps or on the Sherpalution YouTube page. I'm there. So that's really all I got to let you know. And until then, I say to you a hearty Viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpalution!